Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Wellness Wednesday of the fifth annual Feds in Motion Challenge. I am Robin Keogh. I am the Executive Director of FEA, the Federal Employee Education and Assistance Fund. We are the charity that supports the Feds in Motion Challenge. And the challenge is about funding our mission to empower federal and postal employees and their families to achieve their educational, financial, and career goals as they serve the American people. We want to thank you for joining us and for continuing to support the physical, mental, and financial health of federal families during these difficult times. It means more to us than ever that you're here. During the challenge, Wellness Wednesdays are an integral part of our wellness theme, giving us time to delve more deeply into different aspects of wellness and to bring you information from experts who work, teach, and coach in the fields that we're exploring. Today's Sleeping Well to Live Well session will delve into a foundational area of wellness many of us may be struggling with even more than usual. We're looking forward to getting some tips for how to make our sleep better going forward. The host of today's session is Compass Rose Benefits Group, a longtime FIA and Fed supporter, joining us as a Challenge Gold sponsor for the first time. We're so grateful to Compass Rose for being a great partner to FIA and Feds, and it's my pleasure to introduce Zach Ron, Director of Health Plan Administration for Compass Rose Benefits Group, to say a few words and introduce our presenter. Zach?
Thanks, Robin. It's a pleasure to join the Federal Employee Education and Assistance Fund and Dr. Wendy Troxel for today's Wellness Wednesday presentation, Sleep Well to Live Well. I'm Zach Ron, the Director of Health Plan Administration at the Compass Rose Health Plan, which is an FEHB plan that's been around for over 75 years, proudly serving federal employees, retirees, and their families. Supporting the health and well-being of the federal community is at the core of what we do, which is why we're excited to sponsor the upcoming Feds in Motion Challenge in partnership with FIA. This challenge is all about staying active and engaged, values that align with our commitment to helping members live healthier lives and the purpose of today's webinar. You can learn more about the Compass Rose Health Plan on our website at compassrosebenefits.com. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Wendy Troxel is a licensed sleep psychologist and senior behavioral and social scientist at RAND. She is the author of Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep, which was named by the New York Times as one of the top 7 sleep books. Dr. Troxel is internationally recognized for her work on sleep and couples, how sleep affects health and the global economy, and how social environments influence sleep. Her research has received widespread media attention, including interviews on CBS Sunday Morning, Good Morning America, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, MSNBC, and CNN. Her TEDx talk on the impact of school start times on adolescent sleep has also received over 2.6 million views. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Troxel.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today to speak to you about a topic that I'm really passionate about, sleeping well to live well. I want to begin by thanking all of you for your service, and I hope my talk today will give you some useful information and hopefully some helpful tips that you can bring home to your families this evening to help you on the path towards better sleep. So, to begin, I want to acknowledge, first of all, that I recognize that all of you watching this are incredibly busy people, busy with work, busy with family obligations, and this is a very stressful time. And I also know that sleep is often the first thing to go in our busy lives. So I want to start by saying that my goals for today's presentation are not to shame you in any way if you're not today a perfect sleeper and if you have a ways to go to become one. In fact, there is no such thing as a perfect sleeper, so the cat's out of the bag. Rather, my goals for you today, again, is to put away the shame of how well you should be sleeping in these challenging times, but just to help you better understand why sleep should be a priority or more of a priority in your lives. And I want to give you some simple tools that you can take home with you this very evening to help you get the best sleep quality you can. So, as far as the roadmap for today's talk, I'm going to begin by talking about some very basic tenets about sleep. And then I'm going to talk about why I want you to consider sleep as truly the ultimate self-care. And then, probably most importantly, I'm going to leave you with some evidence-based strategies to get you the best sleep quality you can. So to begin with, sleep is absolutely an essential part of our life. We spend, as human beings, approximately 1/3 of our lives asleep. That's if we get the roughly 8 hours of sleep per night that doctors and sleep scientists recommend. That means a person who lives to be 75 years old will spend 25 years, or 9,125 days, of her life asleep. Just think about how much sleep occupies of our life. That in itself should tell you how important it is for our health and functioning and longevity. And to give you a more nuanced perspective about what sleep actually is, because there's lots of misconceptions out there. Sleep is not a solitary, state like a coma where it's like lights out and nothing's happening. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Sleep is actually a highly dynamic biobehavioral process. Broadly speaking, sleep can be divided into two stages. The first stage of sleep is known as rapid eye movement sleep. That's the type of sleep where most of our dreams occur, but not all. And there are specific functions and things that happen during in our brains and our bodies specific to REM sleep. And the other part of sleep is non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep. And non-REM sleep is further divided into four subcategories from 1 to 4, with each level of sleep indicative of deepening stages of sleep. And as human beings, on average, we cycle between non-REM and REM cycles about every 90 minutes throughout the night, meaning that most adults who are getting about 8 hours of sleep are getting somewhere around 4 to 5 REM and non-REM cycles throughout the night. Now, one really important misconception that I want to address here that sort of is so important when you think about sort of this very dynamic process that sleep actually is. I think people often think about sleep as this sort of dead state where it's like lights off and nothing's happening in the brain or the body. Again, that could not be further from the truth. We actually know that during this very dynamic process of sleep, cycling into and out of REM and non-REM, specific functions in the brain and body happen in each of these different stages or phases of sleep. So if you're sacrificing sleep, whether it's REM sleep or deep sleep or even light sleep, you're sacrificing some specific function. So recognizing that, when you sacrifice sleep, it's not just cutting away some dead space, but it's cutting away a specific function that matters for your brain and body. I think that's really an important misconception to address. And I also want to address the misconception that one stage of sleep is more important than the other. That's simply not the case. Healthy sleep is a composite of all stages of sleep, including the lowly light sleep, just like a healthy diet isn't comprised of broccoli alone. And the best way to achieve a healthy composite of all stages of sleep is to focus on the timing, regularity, adequate duration, and quality of your sleep. And towards the end, I'm going to give you some tips to optimize each of those dimensions of sleep that are so critical. Another truth about sleep is that our sleep needs change across the lifespan, though we always need sleep. And what you can see from this graph is that throughout the lifespan, our needs for sleep slowly decrease to some extent, with adults needing somewhere around 7 to 9 hours of sleep, teenagers needing around 8 to 10 hours of sleep, though most of them don't get it. And then as you march down the lifespan, infants spend most of their 24-hour lives asleep, 14 to 17 hours for a newborn. And when you look at this graph and you see this increasing need for sleep, particularly at the younger ages, that's really a testament to just how vital sleep is to developing minds, bodies, and brains. Now, the sad truth is many of us, particularly in this day and age, are not getting enough sleep. About 1 in 3 adults are sleep deprived chronically, meaning that they're failing to get at least a minimum of 7 hours of sleep per night. The situation is actually even more dire among our teenagers. About 7 in 10, or 70% of teenagers are sleep deprived, meaning they're failing to get at least the minimum of 8 hours of sleep per night that's recommended for their developing brains and bodies. And anyone in the room who has a teenager can probably attest to the fact that during the school week, it is very difficult for a teenager to get a solid 8 hours of sleep, in part because our schools start so early, which of course I have given a TED Talk on, and I encourage you to take a look at that in your spare time. Now I want to talk about why sleep is the ultimate self-care, because I really think that this is an important motivating factor, because we all need to amp up our self-care, particularly during stressful times, and sleep is core to that. So, as I mentioned, sleep affects and sleep loss affects every aspect of human functioning. Our brains, our body, our behavior, even our relationships are negatively affected by sleep loss or chronic poor quality sleep. And I just want to give you a few examples. And I think it's important to look at the impact of sleep on our brains themselves, particularly when we think about sort of emotions and behavior, because this really sort of provides sort of the scientific understanding for why we feel so raw, so vulnerable, so stressed out, so unable to cope, and maybe more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviors when we're sleep deprived. So there are two really important parts of the brain here that I want you to think about when it comes to sort of our emotional and behavioral regulation. The first part of the brain that's really important is our amygdala. This part of the brain is the part of the brain where our emotions, our impulses, and risk-taking behaviors really emanate. That's sort of the go, go, go mechanism. I think about that as the gas pedal in the brain. The other part of the brain that's really important to think about in this context is the prefrontal area up here. This is sort of the executive of the brain, the CEO. This is where reasoning, problem solving, and good judgment occur. So I like to think about the prefrontal area as kind of the brakes in the brain. Now, here's the thing. Under sleep deprived or poor sleep quality conditions, what happens in the brain is that the amygdala actually shows an amplification of response. So there's heavier pressing on the gas. At the same time, under sleep deprived or poor sleep quality conditions, the brakes start letting up. We see a dampening of prefrontal activity. So you see this imbalance that can happen in a sleep deprived brain where you're really heavy on the gas, and kind of light or having not quite functional brakes. And that can lead to a slew of both emotional and behavioral consequences. And this probably comes as a surprise to no one. Just think about a time in your life when you weren't getting the sleep you need. Maybe you're the parent of a new one, or maybe you're undergoing a lot of stress at work. And yet, by being sleep deprived, that makes even the smallest molehill into a mountain. When we're sleep deprived, it just makes even everyday mundane stressors that much more difficulty to cope with. And again, that goes back to that imbalance in those important brain centers which regulate our emotions and our ability to cope. Not surprisingly, then, we know that there is a very strong association between sleep and our mental health. First of all, we know that people who have existing mental health problems like depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder are at greater risk for having sleep problems. But the reverse is also true. The presence of sleep problems can increase the risk of the development of mental health problems like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, even suicide. On the flip side, and on the positive side, really elegant experimental research where people are brought into the laboratory under sleep-deprived or well-slept conditions shows that during a well-slept condition, when participants are allowed to sleep through the night, we see this process where one of the really important functions of rapid eye movement sleep is that it seems to help us sort of regulate and smooth out some of the sort of raw, most vulnerable emotions that may be stirred up during the day. So this suggests, again, on the flip side, that if you sacrifice sleep, you actually take away this important sort of emotional balm or sort of natural medication to smooth out the edges of our emotions at night. And I also say this to emphasize, and there's research to support this, that doing everything you can to preserve sleep, particularly during stressful times, is one of the most, if not the most, evidence-based strategies for stress resilience. So protecting your sleep, prioritizing your sleep is one of the best things you can do to help you better manage through stressful times. Now I want to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart specifically, since I've spent about 20 years of my research studying the impact of sleep on relationships. My work and others now clearly shows that when we are well slept, we are happier, less stressed, we're better communicators, we're more empathic, we're even funnier. So we can be better partners if we're in a couple. And if you're interested in this topic, I do have my book, Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep, which uncovers the really fascinating research on couples and sleep, including the challenges that many couples face when sleeping together and strategies for overcoming that. And this has really been a neglected area in sleep, as we tend to view sleep as this isolated individual behavior. But in fact, sleep is social. It is very much tied to our closest relationships. Sleep can affect our relationships, and our relationships can affect our sleep. And I also want to talk about the impact of sleep on our physical health. Another reason why preserving and taking care of our sleep is so important for self-care. What this slide shows you, and I'm not going to belabor the point, is that again, sleep affects virtually every aspect of our physical health and our bodily functioning. In fact, I don't think there's one bodily function or process that isn't improved under well-slept conditions. So we know, for instance, that poor sleep is associated with increased risk of obesity, heart disease, cognitive decline, infectious disease, and our responses to vaccines, even mortality. So I don't say this to scare you, but rather to think about the flip side, about how getting good sleep can help you optimize your physical health and longevity. And I'm going to stop with the doom and gloom there because frankly, none of us needs another concern about, how sleep loss is going to negatively affect us, because we really don't need at this time another worry to keep us awake at night. Instead, I want to turn to the positive and the reality that small changes at the individual, family, community, and corporate level can make a big difference. And I just want to give some examples that you hopefully can take home with you today, at least one of them. So the first suggestion I have is to make sleep a non-negotiable priority. And here again, I'm reminding you of the recommended sleep duration for each age group. But I want to acknowledge that, if you're somebody who's currently, because of the constraints of work and your family obligations, you're barely getting by with 6 hours of sleep per night right now, I don't expect you to immediately jump into the, 8 hours of sleep per night category. In fact, I don't think that that's probably very likely. Instead, if you're sleeping 6 hours per night, could you make a small step to get a little closer to that goal? Maybe add 15 minutes onto your sleep opportunity each night, just to give you that tiny bit extra added sleep, which cumulatively can make a big difference. The second strategy I want to emphasize is the importance of regularity of your sleep-wake routines. I mentioned this earlier, that regularity is one of the fundamental dimensions of a healthy sleep pattern. And in terms of how you set up a regular sleep-wake routine, a lot of people start by thinking about their bedtime and they get really rigid about their bedtime. But actually, wake-up time is the most important for maintaining consistency on. So I'd actually suggest that you start by setting your consistent wake-up time, that's 7 days a week, and then you work backwards from that time to determine what your bedtime is. And again, if you're aiming for, and if you're roughly in the window of 7 to 9 hours of sleep, you'd start at your wake up time and then back up those hours to determine your bedtime. And I'm a human being. I know weekends come and you want to sleep in and your schedule may get slightly off. And for teenagers, they get really off. So I understand that some wiggle room might be needed, but I want to emphasize that regularity is a key dimension of sleep health and directly impacts health outcomes. So trying to maintain consistency is very critical. If you're going to veer off from your regular routine on the weekend, I would say try to keep it within about a 2 hour window of what you do during the week so that you're not having these vast shifts, which are really difficult on our circadian rhythms, which govern our sleep-wake cycles. Have a wind down routine at night. I use this acronym, WIND, as a reminder. The first is, start working towards settling down to set the stage for bedtime about an hour before bedtime. If you don't have that much time, cut it back, but make sure that there's some buffer between your busy waking and working lives or rushing around doing household tasks. Make sure that there's some buffer period that really sets the stage for winding down at night. Immerse yourself in low light conditions. Light is a very powerful stimulus for alertness and can disrupt our circadian rhythms. So as much as possible, keep the lights low in the evening in your home, and that will also cue the brain that bedtime is near. Nurture yourself with some pleasurable and relaxing activity. It really depends on you, the individual, what that might look like. And it does not have to be some elaborate process. Maybe it's taking a bath or a shower. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's cuddling with your partner or listening to music or watching some not distressing TV or the news, probably. And then down you go to bed. Always ensuring, and I really encourage this, if you're somebody who religiously takes your phone to bed, I'm not going to berate you for doing that, but I'm going to encourage you, try a new habit. If you're going to bring your phone to bed, that's your business, but at least give yourself a 15-minute window before lights go out that you're doing something other than scrolling through your phone in those minutes right before lights out and it's actual bedtime. It's so important to send that signal to the brain that it's time to disconnect from the waking world. And our phones are the primary symbol of our connection to our waking world. Instead, spend those 15 minutes, if you have a partner, cuddling with your partner, talking about your day, expressing some gratitude for your partner. You may find that this not only helps you relax, but it's a great way to support your relational bond as well. And we focus a lot on wind down routines, but how we wake up in the morning or rise up is just as critical. And to be honest, many of us are not waking or morning people. So do not fret. It is okay if you don't automatically wake up and feel like embracing the day. Many of us need a little extra support. And this rise up technique can be very helpful. So the first technique in effective morning routine is to refrain from hitting the snooze button. No good really comes out of those, every 7 minute, hitting the snooze button and those little snippets of sleep. It's better to set your alarm at the latest point possible to allow you to go about your day. And when the alarm goes off, you hit it and you get out of bed immediately. Increase your physical activity level. And by this, I mean in a very short bout. Try to get your blood pumping, whether it be holding a plank or briskly walking to the bathroom, or doing a few jumping jacks. Something that can be done in, 30 seconds, that will simply get your blood flow pumping. That is a great way to stimulate alertness and kind of shake off the cobwebs of the night. The S in Rise Up is to splash your face with cold water, or if you're feeling really ambitious, try taking a cold shower. You will definitely be awake after that. Of course, if you have any health issues where a cold shower would not be recommended, certainly talk to your doctor about that. But certainly, splashing your face with cold water is very alerting, and it's again a great way to sort of wash away the night and approach the day. And finally, expose yourself to sunlight. Sunlight is a very powerful cue in the morning time to set our circadian rhythms and to cue our brains that it's time to be awake and alert. So as much morning light exposure as you possibly can. If you live in a very cloudy place, actually, even on a cloudy day, there's a lot of light from outdoors, but if you can't get outside, try to get by a window and also expose yourself to artificial light in the morning. And even best laid plans, I recognize that there will come a time in all of our lives where we struggle to sleep. And so here's my technique for managing those nights that may happen on an occasional basis. If you're somebody who's struggling with sleep on a nightly basis, then I really encourage you to seek treatment and know that some of the most effective treatments for insomnia, for instance, are not pharmacological ones. Behavioral treatments are just as effective, longer lasting, and safer than any medication on the market. But here's a strategy for all of us who will have those occasional stress-related sleep disturbances, let's say. If you find yourself in bed, let's say struggling to fall asleep at the beginning of the night, or let's say you wake up, I don't know, at 3 a.m., and you can't fall back to sleep, and it feels like it's taken about a half an hour. Notice I say it feels like, because I don't want you looking at the clock at all in the middle of the night. No good ever comes of that. If you are struggling to sleep and it feels like about a half an hour has passed, what I'd like you to do is get out of bed. Get out of bed and go to another room and do something relaxing but distracting, like reading a book or knitting or doing a mindfulness coloring book, let's say, even watching TV. The idea is to do something that you can do in relatively low light conditions, that's not on your phone, that's not work related, and that's not overly stimulating. But it is distracting enough so you get your brain off the fact that you're not sleeping, which is very frustrating. And you may find that once your brain gets distracted, your sleep drive will kick back in, making you sleepy again. And at that point, you return to bed. So again, we're trying to break the habit of being awake and frustrated in bed, which can really perpetuate a vicious cycle. People often ask me about naps, and the answer is that naps can be okay for many people, but it really depends on sort of how you're taking the nap and why you're taking the nap. In terms of the why, naps cannot be a long-term substitute for chronically sacrificing nighttime sleep. Your nocturnal bout of sleep is always the most important bout of sleep. However, there are certain situations where, sleep must be sacrificed at night, or maybe you're somebody who just really loves and has the opportunity for a good nap during the day and you feel refreshed after. If that's the case, then being strategic about a nap means the following. First of all, a strategic nap is not too long and it's not too late in the day. So in terms of length of the nap, generally speaking, for most people, an effective nap that actually makes you feel like you've generated energy and refreshed at the end of the nap instead of groggy and even more depleted, generally speaking, a nap between 20 to 45 minutes is recommended. In terms of not too late in the day, what I mean by that is we really want to be careful that a nap doesn't interfere with the quality of our nighttime sleep. And naps, let's say if you fall asleep on the couch at 7 p.m., which is too close to bedtime, that's almost like, having a snack before dinner time. Your appetite for food is depleted. Similarly, if you nap right before bedtime or a few hours before time, that hunger for sleep is depleted, which can result in poor quality sleep at night. So if you're going to nap, I generally say do it before 3 p.m. at the latest. And again, keep it rather short. If you're someone who's struggling with insomnia chronically, we generally recommend that people with insomnia avoid napping, because in the treatment of insomnia, we're really trying to consolidate quality sleep during the nighttime period. People often also ask me about melatonin pills. They are increasingly being used across the lifespan, including in children. And I just want to, be the voice of some caution here. First of all, there's little evidence that melatonin actually works as a sleep aid. And that's actually no surprise, because they weren't intended as a sleep aid per se. Melatonin is really, well, our bodies naturally produce melatonin. So here I'm talking about exogenous melatonin pills, which give your body an extra dose of melatonin. Melatonin as a pill is very effective as what's known as a chronobiotic, meaning a time shifter. So in situations like jet lag or for shift workers, melatonin can be useful. But again, even in those situations, it's best to be used under the advisement of a doctor who can really recommend the optimal timing. It really is not intended as a sleep aid, though again, many people are using it that way. I will just say the word of caution is that we really don't have the data to show, A, that it works, and B, whether there are any long-term side effects of long-term use. And again, for parents out there who are considering or giving their kids melatonin on a nightly basis, I would really encourage you to consider alternatives, to talk to your doctor about other behavioral strategies, to work with your child, or work with yourself if you're having sleep problems, because this is not a chronic solution. And just because something is natural, it's labeled as a supplement, does not mean it's safe. And there's huge variability in sort of the quality and the dosing of melatonin pills, which are sold over the counter in the US. Not true in Europe, by the way. It does require a prescription in other countries. What about sleeping pills? Again, I have to say a word of caution. For some people, there is a time and a place for sleeping pills, so no shame here. And again, if it's your only strategy, I get that. I would encourage you to know that there are other more effective strategies out there, like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Talk to your doctor about that. But the word of caution with taking sleep aids on a chronic basis is, number one, they do not replace naturalistic sleep. When you go back to that sleep architecture graph that I showed at the beginning with that normal cyclical pattern of non-REM and REM, sleep architecture under a medicated state with a sleeping pill is different than the sleep architecture of someone who is naturally sleeping. So take that into consideration if you're using this on a chronic basis. There are known side effects of taking sleeping pills. There's also the risk of dependency and increased tolerance. And the reality is, no sleeping pills on the market were intended for long-term use. If you look at the labels, they're really intended for short-term use. And in that way, they can be very effective for some, but they really weren't meant for long-term use. So if you're in that situation, again, I encourage you to consider the evidence-based alternatives. Beyond the individual level, families can also support good sleep in your children and in your partner. Encourage bedtime routines for everyone in the family. We all benefit from regular sleep routines. And remove electronic media, if possible, from your bedrooms. Remember, parents, that our children are watching us. So if you're bringing your phone to your bedroom, is it that much of a stretch to believe that your children are going to think it's appropriate to bring their phones to their bedroom? So try to be a good role model. I have a setup in our kitchen where everyone, when it's time for bed or time for wind down, everyone disconnects from their phone, charges their phone at night, so our bodies and our brains can recharge with a healthy night of sleep. Communities can also support good sleep by raising awareness of sleep health, like events like today. Talk about this with your colleagues afterwards. I hope you'll find it interesting. Parents and communities, I would encourage you to advocate for healthy school start times. As I discuss in my TEDx talk, school start times are the single most important policy level factor that are contributing to the crisis of sleep loss in our teenagers. And many school districts across the country have heeded the science and actually delayed their start times to support adolescents' sleep, their health, and their academic performance, and support policies in the workplace that promote sleep health for all. And I want to sort of end on a positive note that we actually have evidence, this is from a report we did at the Rand Corporation, that small changes not only can make a difference in your own lives, but they can make a societal level difference. We did a study on the economic implications of sleep loss in the world's largest global economies, including the US. And we found that if people who currently are sleeping less than 6 hours just moved one category up to sleep between 6 to 7 hours, that could add billions to national economies, to the tune of $226.4 billion to the US economy alone, due to increased productivity and better health among our workforce. And as I said, small changes, take one from the suggestions I gave you today, can make a big difference in your life too. And with that, I'd like to end for the day. Thank you for your time. Thank you again for your service. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Dr. Troxel, thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. And I think, for myself, one of the things that I'm taking away from this is that the idea of prioritizing sleep is actually a productive thing to do. I think a lot of us get kind of caught in that trap that you talked about at the beginning of thinking of sleep as just wasted time. It's time when nothing productive is getting done. And to remember that that is really a productive 6 or 7 or 8 hours for our bodies to rest and restore, and that it is supporting our ability to be productive when we're awake.
Absolutely. I think in our busy lives, instead of sleep being this prioritized, carved out time, which it should be, because it's really core, foundational to everything we do, it ends up being the thing we do when everything else gets done, right? And therefore it gets the short shrift. But we just need to change that mindset that sleep is the thing that provides you the foundation to be the productive, healthy human being that has to manage lots of things. Sleep allows us to do that. So making it a carve out, a prioritized carve out, rather than the thing that happens when everything else gets done.
I think that's such good advice. I'm definitely going to take that away from this and make a few changes for myself going forward, for sure. So thank you again so much to Dr. Troxel. Thank you to Zach Ron and to Compass Rose Benefits Group for their support of today's event and of the challenge as a whole. We hope that all of you will join us again next week when we'll be talking about building an emergency fund, a little bit of financial wellness for everyone. Thanks so much.